Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. Wilhelm II, German Emperor. Wilhelm II or William II was the last German emperor and king of Prussia, ruling the German Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia from the 15th of June 1888 to the 9th of November 1918. He was the eldest grandchild of the British Queen Victoria and related to many monarchs and princes of Europe. Crowned in 1888, he dismissed the Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, in 1890, and launched Germany on a bellicose, new course in foreign affairs that culminated in his support for Austria-Hungary in the crisis of July 1914 that led in a matter of days to the First World War. Bombastic and impetuous, he sometimes made tactless pronouncements on sensitive topics without consulting his ministers, culminating in a disastrous Daily Telegraph interview in 1908 that cost him most of his influence.
His leading generals, Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, dictated policy during the First World War with little regard for the civilian government. An ineffective wartime leader, he lost the support of the army, abdicated in November 1918, and fled to exile in the Netherlands.
Biography. Wilhelm was born on the 27th of January 1859 at the Crown Prince's Palace, Berlin, to Prince Frederick William of Prussia and his wife, Victoria, Princess Royal, the eldest daughter of Britain's Queen Victoria. At the time of his birth, his great-uncle Frederick William IV was King of Prussia, and his grandfather and namesake Wilhelm was acting as regent. He was the first grandchild of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, but more importantly, as the first son of the Crown Prince of Prussia. Wilhelm was from 1861 second in the line of succession to Prussia, and also, after 1871, to the newly created German Empire, which, according to the constitution of the German Empire, was ruled by the Prussian king. A traumatic breech birth left him with a withered left arm due to Erb's palsy, which he tried with some success to conceal.
In many photos he carries a pair of white gloves in his left hand to make the arm seem longer, holds his left hand with his right, or has his crippled arm on the hilt of a sword, or holding a cane to give the effect of a useful limb posed at a dignified angle. His left arm was about 6 inches shorter than his right arm.
Historians have suggested that this disability affected his emotional development. Early years. In 1863, Wilhelm was taken to England to be present at the wedding of his uncle Bertie and Princess Alexandra of Denmark. William attended the ceremony in a Highland costume, complete with a small toy dirk. During the ceremony, the 4-year-old became restless.
His 18-year-old uncle Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, charged with keeping an eye on him, told him to be quiet, but Wilhelm drew his dirk and threatened Alfred. When Alfred attempted to subdue him by force, Wilhelm bit him on the leg. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, missed seeing the fracas. To her, Wilhelm remained a clever, good little child, the great favorite of my beloved Vicky. His mother, Vicky, was obsessed with his damaged arm. She blamed herself for the child's handicap and insisted that he become a good rider. The thought that he, as heir to the throne, should not be able to ride was intolerable to her. Riding lessons began when Wilhelm was 8 and were a matter of endurance for Wilhelm. Over and over, the weeping prince was set on his horse and compelled to go through the paces. He fell off time after time, but despite his tears was set on its back again. After weeks of this, he finally got it right and was able to maintain his balance. Wilhelm, from 6 years of age, was tutored and heavily influenced by the 39-year-old teacher Georg Hinz Peter. Pins Peter, he later wrote, was really a good fellow. Whether he was the right tutor for me, I dare not decide.
The torments inflicted on me in this pony riding must be attributed to my mother. As a teenager he was educated at Kassel at the Friedrichs Gymnasium. In January 1877, Wilhelm finished high school and on his 18th birthday received as a present from his grandmother, Queen Victoria, the Order of the Garter. After Kassel he spent 4 terms at the University of Bonn, studying law and politics.
He became a member of the exclusive called Borussia Bonn. Wilhelm possessed a quick intelligence, but this was often overshadowed by a cantankerous temper. As a scion of the royal house of Hohenzollern, Wilhelm was exposed from an early age to the military society of the Prussian aristocracy. This had a major impact on him and, in maturity, Wilhelm was seldom seen out of uniform.
The hyper-masculine military culture of Prussia in this period did much to frame his political ideals and personal relationships. Crown Prince Frederick was viewed by his son with a deeply felt love and respect. His father's status as a hero of the wars of unification was largely responsible for the young Wilhelm's attitude, as were the circumstances in which he was raised.
Close emotional contact between father and son was not encouraged. Later, as he came into contact with the Crown Prince's political opponents, Wilhelm came to adopt more ambivalent feelings toward his father, perceiving the influence of Wilhelm's mother over a figure who should have been possessed of masculine independence and strength.
Wilhelm also idolized his grandfather, Wilhelm I, and he was instrumental in later attempts to foster a cult of the first German emperor as Wilhelm the Great. However, he had a distant relationship with his mother. Wilhelm resisted attempts by his parents to educate him in British attitudes towards democracy. Instead, he agreed with his German tutors' support of autocratic rule, and gradually became thoroughly Prussianized under their influence. He thus became alienated from his parents, suspecting them of putting Britain's interests first. The German Emperor, Wilhelm I, watched as his grandson, guided principally by the Crown Princess Victoria, grew to manhood.
When Wilhelm was nearing 21, the emperor decided it was time his grandson should begin the military phase of his preparation for the throne. He was assigned as a lieutenant to the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards, stationed at Potsdam. In the Guards, Wilhelm said, "I really found my family, my friends, my interests, everything of which I had up to that time had to do without." As a boy and a student, his manner had been polite and agreeable. As an officer, he began to strut and speak brusquely in the tone he deemed appropriate for a Prussian officer. In many ways, Wilhelm was a victim of his inheritance and of Otto von Bismarck's machinations.
Both sides of his family had suffered from mental illness, and this may explain his emotional instability. When Wilhelm was in his early 20s, Bismarck tried to separate him from his parents with some success. Bismarck planned to use the young prince as a weapon against his parents in order to retain his own political dominance. Wilhelm thus developed a dysfunctional relationship with his parents, but especially with his English mother. In an outburst in April 1889, Wilhelm angrily implied that an English doctor killed my father, and an English doctor crippled my arm, which is the fault of my mother, who allowed no German physicians to attend to herself or her immediate family. As a young man, Wilhelm fell in love with one of his maternal first cousins, Princess Elizabeth of Hesse-Darmstadt. She, however, turned him down, and would, in time, marry into the Russian imperial family. In 1880, however, Wilhelm became engaged to Augusta Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein, known as Dona.
The couple married on the 27th of February 1881, and would remain married for 40 years, until her death in 1921. In a period of 10 years, between 1882 and 1892, Augusta Victoria would bear Wilhelm 7 children, 6 sons and a daughter. Beginning in 1884, Bismarck began advocating that Kaiser Wilhelm send his grandson on various diplomatic missions, a privilege denied to the Crown Prince. That year, Prince Wilhelm was sent to the court of Tsar Alexander III in St. Petersburg to attend the coming-of-age ceremony of the 16-year-old Tsarevich Nicholas.
However, Wilhelm's behavior did little to ingratiate himself to the Tsar. 2 years later, Kaiser Wilhelm I took Prince Wilhelm on a trip to meet with the Austro-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph. In 1886, also, thanks to Herbert von Bismarck, the son of the Chancellor, Prince Wilhelm began to be trained twice a week at the Foreign Ministry. One privilege was denied to Prince Wilhelm, to represent Germany at his maternal grandmother, Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee celebrations in London in 1887. Next to the throne, the German Emperor Wilhelm I died in Berlin on 9 March 1888, and Prince Wilhelm's father was proclaimed emperor as Frederick III. He was already suffering from an incurable throat cancer, and spent all 99 days of his reign fighting the disease before dying.
On the 15th of June of that same year, his 29-year-old son succeeded him as German Emperor and King of Prussia, although in his youth he had been a great admirer of Otto von Bismarck. Wilhelm's characteristic impatience soon brought him into conflict with the Iron Chancellor, the dominant figure in the foundation of his empire.
The new emperor opposed Bismarck's careful foreign policy, preferring vigorous and rapid expansion to protect Germany's place in the sun. Furthermore, the young emperor had come to the throne determined to rule as well as reign, unlike his grandfather. While the letter of the imperial constitution vested executive power in the emperor, Wilhelm I had been content to leave day-to-day administration to Bismarck.
Early conflicts between Wilhelm II and his chancellor soon poisoned the relationship between the two men. Bismarck believed that Wilhelm was a lightweight who could be dominated, and he showed scant respect for Wilhelm's policies in the late 1880s.
The final split between monarch and statesman occurred soon after an attempt by Bismarck to implement a far-reaching anti-socialist law in early 1890. Break with Bismarck. The impetuous young Kaiser, says John C.G. Roll, rejected Bismarck's peaceful foreign policy, and instead plotted with senior generals to work in favor of a war of aggression.
Bismarck told an aide that a young man wants war with Russia, and would like to draw his sword straight away if he could. I shall not be a party to it. Bismarck, after gaining an absolute majority in favor of his policies in the Reichstag, decided to make the anti-socialist laws permanent. His cartel, the majority of the Amalgamated Conservative Party and the National Liberal Party, favored making the laws permanent, with one exception: the police power to expel socialist agitators from their homes. The cartel split over this issue, and nothing was passed. As the debate continued, Wilhelm became more and more interested in social problems, especially the treatment of mine workers who went on strike in 1889. He routinely interrupted Bismarck in council to make clear where he stood on social policy. Bismarck sharply disagreed with Wilhelm's policy and worked to circumvent it. Bismarck
feeling pressured and unappreciated by the young emperor and undermined by his ambitious advisors, refused to sign a proclamation regarding the protection of workers along with Wilhelm, as was required by the German constitution. The final break came as Bismarck searched for a new parliamentary majority, with his cartel voted from power due to the anti-socialist bill fiasco.
The remaining powers in the Reichstag were the Catholic Centre Party and the Conservative Party. Bismarck wished to form a new bloc with the Centre Party, and invited Ludwig Windthorst, the party's parliamentary leader, to discuss a coalition. Wilhelm was furious to hear about Windthorst's visit. In a parliamentary state, the head of government depends on the confidence of the parliamentary majority and has the right to form coalitions to ensure his policies a majority, but in Germany, the Chancellor had to depend on the confidence of the Emperor, and Wilhelm believed that the Emperor had the right to be informed before his ministers' meeting. After a heated argument at Bismarck's estate over imperial authority, Wilhelm stormed out. Bismarck, forced for the first time into a situation he could not use to his advantage, wrote a blistering letter of resignation, decrying Wilhelm's interference in foreign and domestic policy, which was published only after Bismarck's death.
Although Bismarck had sponsored landmark social security legislation, by 1889–90, he had become disillusioned with the attitude of workers. In particular, he was opposed to wage increases, improving working conditions, and regulating labor relations. Moreover, the cartel, the shifting political coalition that Bismarck had been able to forge since 1867, had lost a working majority in the Reichstag. At the opening of the Reichstag on 6 May 1890, the Kaiser stated that the most pressing issue was the further enlargement of the bill concerning the protection of the laborer. In 1891, the Reichstag passed the Workers' Protection Acts, which improved working conditions, protected women and children and regulated labor relations. Dismissal of Bismarck. Bismarck resigned at Wilhelm II's insistence in 1890, at the age of 75, to be succeeded as Chancellor of Germany and Minister-President of Prussia by Leo von Caprivi, who in turn was replaced by Chlodwig, Prince of Hohenlohe-Schillings I, in 1894.
Following the dismissal of Hohenlohe in 1900, Wilhelm appointed the man whom he regarded as his own Bismarck, Bernhard von Bülow. In foreign policy, Bismarck had achieved a fragile balance of interests between Germany, France, and Russia. Peace was at hand and Bismarck tried to keep it that way, despite growing popular sentiment against Britain, and especially against Russia.
With Bismarck's dismissal, the Russians now expected a reversal of policy in Berlin. So they quickly came to terms with France, beginning the process that, by 1914, largely isolated Germany. In appointing Caprivi and then Hohenlohe, Wilhelm was embarking upon what is known to history as the new course, in which he hoped to exert decisive influence in the government of the empire. There is debate amongst historians as to the precise degree to which Wilhelm succeeded in implementing personal rule in this era. But what is clear is the very different dynamic which existed between the Crown and its chief political servant in the Wilhelmine era.
These chancellors were senior civil servants and not seasoned politician-statesmen like Bismarck. Wilhelm wanted to preclude the emergence of another Iron Chancellor, whom he ultimately detested as being a boorish old killjoy, who had not permitted any minister to see the emperor except in his presence, keeping a stranglehold on effective political power.
Upon his enforced retirement and until his dying day, Bismarck was to become a bitter critic of Wilhelm's policies. But without the support of the supreme arbiter of all political appointments, there was little chance of Bismarck exerting a decisive influence on policy. Something which Bismarck was able to effect was the creation of the Bismarck myth.
This was a view, which some would argue was confirmed by subsequent events, that, with the dismissal of the Iron Chancellor, Wilhelm II effectively destroyed any chance Germany had of stable and effective government. In this view, Wilhelm's new course was characterized far more as the German ship of state going out of control, eventually leading through a series of crises to the carnage of the First and Second World Wars.
In the early 20th century, Wilhelm began to concentrate upon his real agenda: the creation of a German navy that would rival that of Britain and enable Germany to declare itself a world power. He ordered his military leaders to read Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan's book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and spent hours drawing sketches of the ships that he wanted built. Bülow and Bethmann Hollweg, his loyal chancellors, looked after domestic affairs, while Wilhelm began to spread alarm in the chancelleries of Europe, with his increasingly eccentric views on foreign affairs. Promoter of arts and sciences, Wilhelm enthusiastically promoted the arts and sciences, as well as public education and social welfare. He sponsored the Kaiser Wilhelm Society for the promotion of scientific research. It was funded by wealthy private donors and by the state, and comprised a number of research institutes in both pure and applied sciences.
The Prussian Academy of Sciences was unable to avoid the Kaiser's pressure, and lost some of its autonomy when it was forced to incorporate new programs in engineering and award new fellowships in engineering sciences as a result of a gift from the Kaiser in 1900. Wilhelm supported the modernizers as they tried to reform the Prussian system of secondary education, which was rigidly traditional, elitist, politically authoritarian, and unchanged by the progress in the natural sciences.
As hereditary protector of the Order of St. John, he offered encouragement to the Christian order's attempts to place German medicine at the forefront of modern medical practice through its system of hospitals, nursing sisterhood, and nursing schools, and nursing homes throughout the German Empire.
Wilhelm continued as protector of the order even after 1918, as the position was in essence attached to the head of the House of Hohenzollern.
Personality. Historians have frequently stressed the role of Wilhelm's personality in shaping his reign. Thus, Thomas Nipperdey concludes he was. Historian David Fromkin states that Wilhelm had a love-hate relationship with Britain. According to Fromkin, Lang et al.
Emphasized the negative international consequences of Wilhelm's erratic personality.
Relationships with foreign relatives. As a grandchild of Queen Victoria, Wilhelm was a first cousin of the British Empire's King George V, as well as of Queens Marie of Romania, Maud of Norway, and Victoria Eugenie of Spain, and of the Empress Alexandra of Russia. In 1889, Wilhelm's younger sister, Sophia, married the future King Constantine I of Greece. Wilhelm, infuriated by his sister's conversion to Greek Orthodoxy upon her marriage, attempted to ban her from entering Germany.
Wilhelm's most contentious relationships were with his British relations. He craved the acceptance of his grandmother, Queen Victoria, and of the rest of her family, despite the fact that his grandmother treated him with courtesy and tact. His other relatives found him arrogant and obnoxious, and they largely denied him acceptance. He had an especially bad relationship with his uncle Bertie, the Prince of Wales.
Between 1888 and 1901, Wilhelm resented his uncle, himself a mere heir to the English throne, treating Wilhelm not as Emperor of Germany, but merely as another nephew. In turn, Wilhelm often snubbed his uncle, whom he referred to as the Old Peacock, and lauded his position as emperor over him. Beginning in the 1890s, Wilhelm made visits to England for Cowes Week on the Isle of Wight and often competed against his uncle in the yacht races.
Edward's wife, the Danish-born Alexandra, first as Princess of Wales and later as Queen, also disliked Wilhelm, never forgetting the Prussian seizure of Schleswig-Holstein from Denmark in the 1860s, as well as being annoyed over Wilhelm's treatment of his mother. Despite his poor relations with his English relatives, nevertheless, when he received news that Queen Victoria was dying at Osborne House in January 1901, Wilhelm travelled to England and was at her bedside when she died and remained for the funeral.
He also was present at the funeral of King Edward VII in 1910. In 1913, Wilhelm hosted a lavish wedding in Berlin for his only daughter, Victoria Louise. Among the guests at the wedding were Tsar Nicholas II, who also disliked Wilhelm, and his English cousin, King George V, and his wife, Queen Mary. Antisemitism. Wilhelm's biographer Lamar Cecil identified Wilhelm's curious, but well-developed anti-Semitism, noting that in 1888 a friend of Wilhelm declared that the young Kaiser's dislike of his Hebrew subjects, one rooted in a perception that they possessed an overweening influence in Germany, was so strong that it could not be overcome. Cecil concludes, Wilhelm never changed, and throughout his life he believed that Jews were perversely responsible, largely through their prominence in the Berlin press and in leftist political movements, for encouraging opposition to his rule. For individual Jews, ranging from rich businessmen and major art collectors to purveyors of elegant goods in Berlin stores, he had considerable esteem, but he prevented Jewish citizens from having careers in the army and the diplomatic corps and frequently used abusive language against them. On the 2nd of December 1919, Wilhelm wrote to Field Marshal August von Mackensen, denouncing his own abdication as the deepest, most disgusting shame ever perpetrated by a person in history. The Germans have done to themselves, egged on and misled by the tribe of Judah. Let no German ever forget this, nor rest until these parasites have been destroyed and exterminated from German soil. Wilhelm advocated a regular international all-world's pogrom à la Russe as the best cure, and further believed that Jews were a nuisance that humanity must get rid of some way or other.
I believe the best thing would be gas.
Foreign affairs. German foreign policy under Wilhelm II was faced with a number of significant problems. Perhaps the most apparent was that Wilhelm was an impatient man, subjective in his reactions, and affected strongly by sentiment and impulse. He was personally ill-equipped to steer German foreign policy along a rational course.
It is now widely recognized that the various spectacular acts which Wilhelm undertook in the international sphere were often partially encouraged by the German foreign policy elite. There were a number of notorious examples, such as the Kruger telegram of 1896 in which Wilhelm congratulated President Paul Kruger of the Transvaal Republic on the suppression of the British Jameson raid, thus alienating British public opinion.
British public opinion had been quite favourable toward the Kaiser in his first 12 years on the throne, but it turned sour in the late 1890s. During the First World War, he became the central target of British anti-German propaganda, and the personification of a hated enemy. Wilhelm invented and spread fears of a yellow peril, trying to interest other European rulers in the perils they faced by invading China.
Few other leaders paid attention. Wilhelm used the Japanese victory in the Russo-Japanese War to try and incite fear in the West of the yellow peril they faced by a resurgent Japan, which Wilhelm claimed would ally with China to overrun the West. Under Wilhelm, Germany invested in strengthening its colonies in Africa and the Pacific, but few became profitable and all were lost during the First World War. In Southwest Africa, a native revolt against German rule led to the Hero and Namaqua genocide, although Wilhelm eventually ordered it to be stopped. One of the few times when Wilhelm succeeded in personal diplomacy was when in 1900 he supported the marriage of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria to Sophie Chotek, against the wishes of Emperor Franz Joseph. A domestic triumph for Wilhelm was when his daughter Victoria Louise married the Duke of Brunswick in 1913.
This helped heal the rift between the House of Hanover and the House of Hohenzollern, which followed the annexation of Hanover by Prussia in 1866. Abushiri Arab Revolt in East Africa. The German East Africa Company colonized the East African coast around Tanganyika, but the Arabs, under Abushiri ibn Salim al-Hati, started a massive revolt along the coast, killing German representatives of the company and seizing control. The German Empire sent troops to crush the uprising, with the help of a British blockade. The uprising was defeated by 1889, and the Arab rebel leader Abushiri was hanged by German forces. Hun speech of 1900. The Boxer Rebellion, an anti-Western uprising in China, was put down in 1900 by an international force of British, French, Russian, Italian, American, Japanese, and German troops. The Germans, however, forfeited any prestige they might have gained for their participation by arriving only after the British and Japanese forces had taken Peking, the site of the fiercest fighting. Moreover, the poor impression left by the German troops' late arrival was made worse by the Kaiser's ill-conceived farewell address, in which he commanded them, in the spirit of the Huns, to be merciless in battle.
Wilhelm delivered this speech in Bremerhaven on the 27th of July 1900, addressing German troops who were departing to suppress the Boxer Rebellion in China. The speech was infused with Wilhelm's fiery and chauvinistic rhetoric, and clearly expressed his vision of German imperial power. There were two versions of the speech. The Foreign Office issued an edited version, making sure to omit one particularly incendiary paragraph that they regarded as diplomatically embarrassing. The edited version read like this: the official version omitted the following passage, from which the speech derives its name. The term Hun later became the favored epithet of Allied anti-German war propaganda during the First World War.
Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.